Welcome to the big stories on the AM show here on Joy News, your home of independent, fearless, and credible journalism. We focus for our big story, our first big story today, on President Akufo-Addo's final speech or final address to the UN General Assembly, where he highlighted critical issues regarding Africa's position in the global system, calling for reforms in global governance, particularly the UN Security Council, and stressing the need for Africa to take ownership of its security and development. He also claimed that Ghana remains the beacon of democracy and good governance in West Africa. These statements are particularly significant, especially in the face of rising instability and fragile democracies in the region. We will be discussing this with our guests, but first, let's take a listen to what the President said, and then we'll come back to discuss.
Help but reflect on the significance of this moment, as this will be my final opportunity to address the United Nations General Assembly as I enter the closing months of my presidency. Over the past 8 years, I've had the privilege of speaking on several variations of the essential themes that quite properly dominate the deliberations of this global assembly: the condition of humanity and the state of the planet. Serving the people of Ghana, and by extension those of West Africa, Africa, and the world, has truly been the greatest blessing of my life. Indeed, being here this morning fills me with both pride and humility. Pride in the limited progress we have made together as nations, and humility in recognizing the challenges that still remain. My time as president has been deeply fulfilling, and I'm profoundly grateful for the trust placed in me by my fellow Ghanaians. It has been an honor to serve them and to contribute to advancing peace, security, and development on the global stage. Madam President, I'm here with a heart full of hope, yet mindful of the great challenges that still confront us. As President of the Republic of Ghana and as a citizen of the world, I'm acutely aware of the shared responsibility we carry. Our work here is nothing less than shaping the future of humanity, a future that will affect generations long after we are gone. Leaving no one behind, acting together for the advancement of peace, sustainable development, and human dignity for present and future generations, reminds us that the decisions we take here will define whether we rise to meet the hopes of billions or continue to let inequalities and injustice persist. We owe it to those who look to this body for leadership to act and not just to talk. The world we live in today is a stark, unfortunate contrast of privilege and hardship. For too long, the voices of those marginalized, those left behind, have been drowned out. They constitute the bulk of humanity. These are the voices of the poor, the displaced, the vulnerable. We cannot, in good conscience, leave them behind. They should be at the center of our discussions and our decisions. Africa, in particular, knows the cost of being left out. Yes, we're a continent rich in potential and resilient in the face of adversity, but we have also been disadvantaged by a global system that has generally treated us as an afterthought. We've been viewed merely as passive recipients of aid rather than as equal partners in global progress. The well-meaning promises of assistance have failed to materialize to bring about the long-term change we so passionately need. Such aid as is offered often comes with strings attached, limiting our ability to shape our own futures. Africa is not a continent of despair. She's full of great possibilities. She's required, however, to chart a new course of development. Our young population is filled with energy, creativity, and ambition. The people of Africa are not asking for handouts. They're demanding opportunities in a new global architecture so they can have access to education, healthcare, and jobs, to to be able to build better lives for themselves, their families, and their descendants. In Ghana, we've taken bold and decisive steps to ensure that no one is left behind in our national development, and we have shown that it is possible. Our flagship free senior high school policy has benefited 5.7 million young people, many of whom would have been denied the opportunity to learn, to dream, and to succeed. This initiative has transformed the lives of millions, positioning the next generation of Ghanaians to take their place as leaders in the global economy. But this is just the beginning. We need a global commitment to ensure that every child, no matter where they are born, has access to quality education. A world where children are left unprepared for the challenges ahead is not a just world. Beyond education, we've also prioritized health care for our people. Through Agenda 111, my government has embarked on the largest ever healthcare infrastructure project in Ghana's history. This initiative is constructing 111 hospitals across the country, ensuring that even the most remote regions have access to modern healthcare facilities. This is part of our broader goal of ensuring that no one in Ghana is left without the basic right to health. We've also taken significant steps to boost food security and economic growth through the Program for Planting for Food and Jobs. This initiative has improved food production, created jobs, and enhanced incomes for millions of Ghanaians. It is a clear demonstration that with the right policies and investments, we can transform our agricultural sector and ensure that no one goes hungry. In the same vein, our one district, one factory policy is transforming the industrial landscape of the nation, generating the structural transformation of our economy, which is our major strategic objective. And in addition, Ghana has embraced in full the teachings of the Fourth Industrial Revolution and is actively pursuing an agenda of digitalization. Under my administration, we've revolutionized public service delivery by integrating technology into governance. From the introduction of the Ghana Card, which has streamlined identification and access to services, to the digitalization of the country's land registry, these reforms have enhanced transparency, efficiency, and accountability. Digitalization has improved the lives of ordinary Ghanaians and has also laid the groundwork for sustainable economic growth in the digital age. And let us not forget the strides we have made in enhancing the rule of law and governance. Through reforms in the judicial system, strengthening our democratic institutions, and promoting transparency, Ghana continues to be a beacon of good governance in Africa. We have enacted laws and implemented policies that uphold the principles of accountability and ensure that every Ghanaian, regardless of their background, is protected by the rule of law. Madam President, it is impossible to address the challenges of today without speaking of the contradictions that exist within this global institution. We gather here to discuss peace, but wars continue to ravage nations. We speak of justice, yet justice endures. Take the Russian invasion of Ukraine, for instance. Millions of lives have been uprooted. Thousands have lost their lives, and yet the Security Council has struggled to respond decisively, just as it is struggling to make a decisive intervention in the tragic ongoing war in Gaza and the Lebanon. The structure of the Council reflects a world that no longer exists, and its failure to act in times of crisis raises a difficult question. What is the purpose of the Security Council if it cannot intervene when the world needs it most? Reforming the UN Security Council is a matter of fairness and necessity. The current structure, created in 1945, no longer reflects the realities of today's geopolitical and economic landscape. Africa, Latin America, and South Asia remain underrepresented despite their significant influence on global affairs. This lack of representation undermines the legitimacy of the Council's decisions, and the use of veto power by a few permanent members often paralyzes its ability to act effectively during crises. Reform is essential to ensure that the Council is more inclusive, democratic, and responsive to the complex challenges we face today. The world has changed, and the Security Council must change with it to maintain its relevance in promoting global peace and security. For years, I've championed the need to reform the Security Council as per the Ezulwini Consensus, the common African position on UN reform, which calls for Africa to have permanent seats on the Council. It is incomprehensible that a continent of 1.4 billion people has no permanent voice in shaping decisions that affect global peace and security. The time for half measures is over. We need a Security Council that is fit for purpose in today's world. It is heartening, however, that finally the demand for reform has found acceptance by leaders of 2 of the 5 permanent members, President Joe Biden of the United States of America and President Emmanuel Macron of France. Hopefully, the others will soon follow suit. We must also recognize that the fight for peace goes beyond government actions. It is a fight for humanity itself. In Africa, we have often borne the brunt of conflicts, sending our troops to peacekeeping missions with limited support from the global community. While I'm pleased to see the UN now taking steps to finance peacekeeping in Africa, an outcome of Ghana's presidency of the UN Security Council, we must go further. Peacekeeping alone is not enough. We must address the potential causes of conflict, poverty, inequality, and lack of opportunity. True peace comes from investing in education, healthcare, and economic development. However, peace cannot be imposed from the outside. It must be built from within. African nations must take ownership of their security, and the African Union needs to strengthen itself to be able to respond swiftly to threats. Madam President, as I speak today, ongoing developments in West Africa are deeply troubling. Military coups in Mali, Guinea, Burkina Faso, and Niger threaten the democratic progress we have worked so hard to achieve within the ECOWAS community. These coups are stark reminders that democracy is indeed fragile and must be continually nurtured. In Ghana, however, we will remain resolute in our commitment to democracy. As my presidency draws to a close, I want to assure this Assembly that the upcoming 2024 elections in Ghana will be free, fair, and transparent. Ghanaians have demonstrated time and again in the last 3 decades their strong attachment to democracy, which they will not permit to be undermined. The Electoral Commission, supported by Ghana's security services, is well equipped to ensure that the will of the Ghanaian people is respected. Ghana has long been a beacon of democracy in Africa, and we intend to keep it that way. The 2024 elections will be proof of our enduring adherence to the rule of law, transparency, and the principles of democratic accountability that have guided our nation in recent decades. Madam President, we find ourselves at a pivotal moment in history. The decisions we make today will shape the future of our world. We can choose to act with courage, compassion, and a commitment to leave no one behind, or we can choose inaction and allow the suffering of millions and the degradation of the planet to continue. Let me end by reminding us all that the future is not something that simply happens. It is something we create. We have the power in this room to change the course of history. Let us not shy away from that responsibility. Let us act now, and let us act together. I wish you God's blessings in all your current and future deliberations, and I thank you for your attention.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Republic.
Interesting comments there, and I think my takeaway, 3 thematic areas: Ghana's commitment to democracy and good governance, the accountability of public officials, and the need for reforms at the UN Security Council to reflect the current geopolitical realities, which feeds into the president's posturing on where Africa stands on the global stage. But let's discuss this. My guest this morning is Dr. Ishmael Kwabla-Hlovo. He's an international relations expert and a political analyst. And he joins us via Zoom. Doc, many thanks for your time. Let me start by asking you for a quick reflection on everything that the president has said before we get surgical with it.
Okay, good morning, and good morning to your viewers. I think that the president's speech is diplomatically apt, and he actually did a good job by recounting some of his achievements in office, highlighting what he thinks he has achieved for Ghana, for humanity. He also went on to dive a little bit into the challenges, acknowledging the challenges that still persist, before calling on the UN for some reforms, which is appropriate, because for a very long time that the Security Council has been a little bit of not up to tax institution, but when it comes to major conflict involving major powers, the institution seems to be paralyzed because of how it was structured and the issue of veto power, and also the marginalization of Africa as a group, as a continent from that council, and a lot of global governance institutions and structures that somehow marginalize Africa out of world governance and continue to keep us somehow impoverished and underdeveloped. So, on the nutshell, this is a very good diplomatic engagement that he has. It's a chance to sell Ghana. He did his best. But then, as we interrogate it, you will see that some of the issues, just opposing what's happening on the ground, may not look what it actually.
Yeah, let's start there. So the president portrayed Ghana as a beacon of democracy and good governance on the African continent. From an international relations or an international perspective, really, let's open it up a bit. How valid is this claim? Are there areas where Ghana is actually seen as a model, and where do the gaps remain?
Thank you. If you look at the democratic development, particularly in the sub-region, West Africa and Africa for that matter, Ghana has done a relatively decent job in advancing the cause of democracy. Indeed, over the last 30 years, we have been the country that have progressively improved on the conduct of elections, regardless of the challenges we have had. Even when we are pushed to the wall, we use the judicial system to somehow address our differences, and we keep going. And that cannot be taken away from the nation Ghana. Now, if you look around what's happening across the sub-region with the reintroduction of coups in the sub-region in the recent past, then that should tell you that as a country, we have done quite a decent job. We have done so well in advancing the cause of democracy. And as he has said, he has come to the end of his tenure and he is peacefully handing over. There is no attempt to try to prolong his rule, to stay in power beyond the term's limit. At least all the leaders that we have had under the Fourth Republic, even the one that was feared that he would try to empower with the Constitution, Rawlings peacefully handed over. President Kufuor handed over. President Mill unfortunately passed on. President Mahama handed over, and President Akufo-Addo, through this speech, has indicated his readiness to hand over power to whoever may be winning the next election. So you must give Ghana some credit for how far we have been able to nurture and grow in democratic practice, although there are obvious challenges, even in the administration of elections, in terms of our judicial system and other aspects of democracy. Yes, we are still nurturing. It takes time to grow some of these democratic institutions and then the relevant democratic culture that support them. We are still a growing democracy, but if you look across the board comparatively, we have scored quite a high mark that other nations, at least within the sub-region, look up to.
So, I mean, in light of these remarks that the president has made, and you've just highlighted on where we've actually made significant gains in terms of our democratic development and the gaps that remain, How realistic is it that these reforms that the president is calling for at the United Nations Security Council can actually see the light of day?
These reforms of the Security Council has long been an aspiration for African leaders who believe that in terms of geopolitical configuration of the world, this is unfair to them. But you see that it took a long time for some leaders like the United States, like France, to come around and agree that indeed what was agreed in 1945 can no longer hold water in this world. But again, it's about power, and therefore those who hold power will normally not give out power voluntarily. So it's a call that will keep on having. But even if you look at the position of the United States on this issue, where they somehow reluctantly agree that Africa needs a permanent seat, there is still the issue of if Africa will have a veto power. Because if you look at the Security Council, actually, the whole issue, the whole power of it is the use of the veto power within the Security Council. If you talk about the war in Ukraine, if you talk about Gaza, it's about the fact that the US, the Russians, the Chinese have the veto power. So any resolution brought before this council that does not favor any of them will be vetoed. So, but the US position is that Africa should be given a seat, but without a veto power. That is literally saying that you are admitting Africa into the room, but Africa will not have a voice. And that, I'm not sure that's a position Africans need. They need to be part and parcel of the decision making. So if you admit Africa into the Security Council, any Africa into the Security Council, you must be looking at either granting them the veto power or taking away the veto power entirely. Because if we are just going to participate in the decisions of the Security Council as permanent members without
non-permanent members,
as permanent members without the accompanying veto power to influence what they are doing, it will amount to virtually validating and legitimizing what the permanent members will be doing, because then you don't have the moral right to question that you were not part of that process and that process will affect you, because then it will be pointed out to you that you were part of the process. So I believe that Africa does not want to be in the room, but Africa wants to be in the room and be relevant and take part in the decisions that they are making. Now, again, it has to do with how does Africa want to be a permanent member? There are various proposals that are being made. Some countries like Nigeria want a permanent seat for themselves, but that in this world will not be ideal. The most ideal proposal, perhaps the one that comes from Paul Kagame, that the permanent seat of Africa should be given to the African Union Commission, and then one of it should be rotational among the member countries, which would cure the issue of rivalry among the regional powers. So this call will keep growing as more of the advanced, powerful nations of the world are becoming more receptive of the call. Then it then borders on how will Africa be admitted. And so it's a long-term process that will take some time. The expansion of this council is long overdue. It has given undue power to some countries to influence issues within other parts of the world. But if Africa will also own its own security, it depends on Africa making significant commitment to security at home.
Doctor, let me probe that point you just made about Africa taking control of its own security. I mean, the president's call for nations to take ownership of their own security comes at a time when external interventions have often been viewed as insufficient or misaligned with the African interest. So what specific steps can we take as African countries like Ghana to assert greater control over our security challenges? And how can the regional bodies like ECOWAS play a more effective role in maintaining stability and preventing conflict?
Thank you. So when we talk about security, there are various dimensions to it. One, the basis of it is that most of the security issues that African countries are facing are issues of governance, are issues of democratic deficit. So, and if you look at the coups that we have had that have actually brought military regimes to power, is the inability of the African state to govern effectively and provide security. And that have given room to some of these military leaders to take control. So how do we take back control? One is to face our governance challenges. I mean, good governance will cure most of the security issues that we are facing. But more importantly, in as much as we want to be in control of our own security, we will still need support. As you see, the president as he talks about we taking control of our own security, he's still asking for the international community to help us in terms of going to peacekeeping and others. And so somehow we will have to be reliant on them to fix our problems for us. So what is needed is, for instance, the long-term project of an African standing army. That should be a project that the African Union should lead significantly. The ECOWAS standby force must be activated to have a contingent that is always ready to be deployed to areas where violent conflict may erupt unexpectedly. Now, so that means that states must begin to put significant resources into some of these regional bodies. What we have currently is that ECOWAS, AU, all these are being funded by external sources. So once they are funding you, you can virtually wane yourself off of their influence. So countries must increase their output. And that means that the governance of our economies must also significantly improve. And that also call for some level of restructuring of the world economy. Currently, not only the Security Council is unfair to Africa, the global economy itself is somehow unfair to Africa. That notwithstanding the economic mismanagement of African countries themselves. So you look at, for instance, debt to GDP ratio of African countries. What you observe is that many of these African countries are below 100% treatment, but then they borrow at comparatively very high interest rate of between 5 to 16% for 10-year bond in the Eurobond market. And this is quite a huge interest. So part of the problem driving the African debt crisis is actually that huge interest rate that African countries are forced to pay due to other bad credit ratings and misperceptions about Africa. So this needs to be corrected. If you look at Canada, you look at the US, all of them, their debt to GDP ratio is over 100%, but they are borrowing at virtually almost zero interest. And that is unfair. These are the kind of structures that somehow keep Africa where it is. And so you may have to consider situations where Africans are dealt with equally so that they can economically be empowered to take their own destiny and security into their hands.
So it all comes down to self-reliance, our ability to produce more, increase our exports so that we have more control over our affairs. And,
once you have more control over your economy, once you have more control over your own resources, you are able to manage it significantly very well. Now, when we talk about security, unfortunately for our president, the greatest security threat to Ghana is the issue of galamsey. Now,
well, I want us to, we will look at the domestic political angle in a bit, but I want us to conclude on the, fallouts from the UN and issues that concern Africa as a bloc. So let me just ask this final question and then we get into Ghana as a whole. So how can we, Ghana, in terms of democracy, leverage our position as a democratic leader in West Africa to support democratic resilience across the region? And you yourself also mentioned all these military takeovers that are surrounding us as a nation. How can we help?
Okay, so we have to have a clear-cut policy. I have tried to look at the various manifestos of the two major parties going forward, and I don't see a clear-cut policy orientation as to how they intend to deal with the military regimes of Mali, of Burkina Faso, and so forth. These are regimes that have virtually gone back on democracy, and therefore, as a country, we must have a template to engage them even beyond ECOWAS and try to see how we can negotiate with them to return civilian rule or help them address their challenges. As Ghana, the surest path to us influencing other countries within the region is to translate the gains in democracy to the well-being of our people. If the Ghanaian citizens become better, it serves us as an attraction for others to choose our path. But if the Ghanaian citizen continues to grow worse, then no country will choose your political system as the best option for itself. And more importantly, as we head towards the next election, we must strive to improve upon electoral administration, all other aspects, judicial administration, and other aspects of our democracy. Now, when we are able to master the art at home, then we can provide lessons for other nations that are struggling with democratic governance. So we have to improve our own institutions here and use it as a template for others who are in need of governance reforms.
So from a the domestic political angle then, I mean, the president talks about accountability of public officials and all that. Do you think that government's anti-corruption mechanisms, such as the Special Prosecutor's Office, have lived up to expectations in holding officials accountable? And what can be done to strengthen these institutions? And then we'll talk about galamsey. I know you want to get there.
The problem with our setup is that we tend to celebrate the passing of laws and the setting up of institutions as an achievement on itself. The truth is that the passing of a particular law, the setting up of a particular institution, is a process that has to lead to an end. But what we have been doing over the years is that when we are confronted with the issues of corruption, the issues of either mismanagement or whatever, we tend to believe that if we can pass a law, the law will virtually address the underlying challenge. But that is not true. The problem Ghana is facing in terms of fighting corruption is about law enforcement. It's about people who should have the moral courage to actually implement what they believe they stand for. Because, mind you, all these laws that we have passed, all these institutions must somehow be run by human beings. And these human beings must have the right moral and moral norms to be able to run this institution. So the only significant improvement that Ghana has made, in my opinion, is the fact that the new educational curriculum that is being brought up have incorporated into the teaching of that curriculum what we call democratic values, in the sense that while we were keen in school for reporting late, children should be given the chance to explain themselves, and those explanations must surface for the teacher to allow them to learn. Children must be encouraged to always speak the truth. Now, I believe that we don't just have the right cultural mindset to run some of the institutions we believe we are running. So we pass the law and we somehow find loopholes in the same law to undermine the law we pass to fight corruption. If you take one of the biggest problems in the public sector, procurement. Now, so you pass the procurement law, you set up a procurement offices all across all government institutions. I tell you, procurement has become one of the hurdles through which we are actually perpetuating the corruption that we seek to be fighting. So why is it so? Because the mindset, the cultural mindset is not right to run that institution. So I believe that over time, if these educational reforms translate to training people with the right cultural mindset to run this institution, then we'll get somewhere. But currently, we must begin to see Ghana as a collective responsibility, and that office holders must know that somehow their actions and inactions affect everybody. And those of us in civil society, those of us on the street, must begin to put more pressure for people who are doing wrong in the public space to come out of the public space, to face some level of accountability. The culture of resigning is quite strange to Ghanaians. So a lot of wrongs can be done, and the individual perceive that, well, this will be news for some time.
Actually,
and
Doug,
keep on sitting
the
there.
president or this government solution, some of the solutions they're proposing to fight corruption, and he touted over there in his last address, it talks about digitalization, removing the human interface in terms of public service institutions, right? Is that not in any way a way to replace, the human interface, where you just said that because of the moral compass of some of the people in these institutions, the fight against corruption is futile?
Yeah,
Digitalization
yes,
solves the problem, does it not? Yeah.
You are digitalizing, but remember, even the systems must be run by men. So, for instance, you set up a system with all the sophistication of IT, and yes, somebody will have to click some button somewhere to allow for certain things to be done. If that person chooses not to click the button, nothing happens. So one of the things I'm saying is that in as much as we have all these systems in place, we somehow create some loophole somewhere that allow us to do what we want to do. Okay. So you see, one of the things about digitalization is that the power of IT can be taken over by interest group to further their own interest, to enhance their own power position. It is not automatic that once you are digitalizing, it translates into something great. One of the things about it is that I can implement an IT project or a digitalization project in a way that gives me more power instead of reducing the power and giving more transparency. And so it's not like once you digitalize, the issue of corruption becomes something of the past. It only somehow gives you the ability to deal with corruption if you have the will, the political will to deal with it.
And there we have, well, there's that phrase again, the political will. It appears every time we talk about all the issues, the incidents of corruption, it comes down to the lack of political will. And while the president emphasized accountability, critics argue that his government has faced many corruption allegations and challenges in ensuring transparency. So how would you assess the government's record on corruption and public accountability in the second term?
Okay, assessing government record on corruption and accountability, I would say that the second term of this government have not been the best. I will score them around 40% for what they have done. In fact, they have done well in terms of setting up institutions, passing laws, and so forth. But when it comes to implementation, somehow the government have been found wanting. Of course, based on the kind of what we call a highly prismatic society that we run, where we bring a lot of informal rules into the formal space. And therefore, knowing this person, knowing that person, sometimes make it difficult to enforce the law. So, yes, they have done their bit, but they are not where we want them to be. There are so many people still in public office who, under normal circumstances, should be going through some investigation, who should somehow voluntarily resign their position based on some of the issues that have been coming out. So for me, well, they have done their bit. You can't say they have done nothing. They have done the best they can do, their ability can do. And perhaps maybe the next government will give us a template to judge them better. But where I stand, they will score around 40% in terms of the fight against corruption.
Well, thank you for doing that assessment. So in terms of transparency, can we reconcile the posturing of this NPP government in this nearly 8 years of being in office and the utterances or the submissions of the president in terms of transparency and accountability? I'm citing the fight against galamsey and the posturing of the government on the position, the ongoing brouhaha, or should I say impasse, between the NDC and the Electoral Commission in the build-up to election 2024, and all the other issues where you would expect that the president or this government would take a stronger stance to ensure or inspire confidence in the people. Do you think that we can reconcile the submission of the president at the just ended, at his last address to the UN Security Council, and what we actually experiencing locally here in Ghana?
So yes, as I said, his address to the UN is diplomatic engagement and opportunity to sell Ghana. So you don't expect him to draw so much on the negative. He has to market his country. He has to show the world the good about Ghana. So he did an excellent job in marketing Ghana.
So would you say then that the reality he's selling to the UN is far different from what we're experiencing in the country?
No country sells the whole reality anyway.
Okay.
No country sells the whole reality. I mean, you have to pick and choose what you are going to sell. There are poor people in London, but they show you the tall buildings. It's for a reason. So, yeah, having said that, as I said, it's diplomatically apt. But when we come to the ground, then the other side, there are contradictions, as it were. We're talking about transparency, and yet we are unable to fight a canker like galamsey because political persons are involved. We are unable to deal with a threat to the very survival of the nation. Now, you see, when we talk about galamsey, perhaps those of us who sit far, who don't visit the sites, we are taking it to mean it's one of those problems that Ghanaians will talk and talk. Now, it will come to a point when they are talking, and action is not. These issues are naturally progressing from bad to worse. So there's a stage at which you have to act. If you fail to act at that stage and it gets worse, you can't do anything. You can't do anything about it. So as you are having your major water bodies that supply water to your towns and cities and villages being polluted, people are giving birth to deformed babies, and virtually there is no clean water for your population, then you realize that the economic progress we are chasing that lead to galamsey will not come. It will be undermined. So in as much as we're talking about transparency, where we are talking about accountability, the place that this should be tested in the fight against galamsey, where allegedly officialdom has been involved. So you see that contradiction talking about security, global security. Well, a basic security issue in Ghana. This is a fundamental threat to the existence of the Ghanaian. This is an existential threat that must be dealt with. Now, the way we are going about the galamsey, as if it's one of the normal problems that will go away anytime soon, it must take a coordinated action to deal with. And how do you deal with an issue like this where it has become the basis for sometimes funding of political parties? For some time, some groups have pondered the idea of public funding of political parties. As it is now, the way we fund political parties in this nation make issues like galamsey very, very difficult to resolve. The way we have structured our politics make the issues like galamsey very difficult to resolve. Because if you look at the political terrain, now you have 4 years to implement a particular mandate. And therefore, you are looking for quick fix money here and there to kind of fix it. And so those who bring the money, either it's galamsey or whatever money it is, you hardly care. So in terms of winning the election, these people have become very relevant. They have become a great constituency influence political leaders, either NDs or MPP. They will be very strong and influence what they do. Now, so you have to reset what you do. Either you consider public funding of political party, make the political funding regime more clearer for all of us to know who is donating what, for what people. Then we will be able to deal with some of these issues. And again, fundamentally, the type of economy you are running make issues like galamsey very difficult to deal with. In fact, you are running gold for oil. You are running this based on the ability to extract gold from the ground. Since we adopted the structural adjustment programs, we have resorted in an unrelenting exploration of the environment to finance ourselves. The environment has limits, and this is the limit we are getting to. So unless you change the paradigm you are operating, where you believe that the market can fix every problem, the market doesn't fix every problem. So the state itself, on one hand, is somehow a culprit in promoting the galamsey by the very economic policies that we are pushing. So you are opening up your forest reserves for exploration because you needed income to fix problems. Now,
Dr. Holovo, you have to wrap on this point for me. Yeah.
The problems you are trying to fix will not get fixed. In fact, if you build a hospital from the money you get from opening out a gold reserve for miners to either legal or illegal to go and harvest their gold or mine their gold from there, soon you realize that the number of people who attend that hospital and the expenditure of the hospital outweigh the money you got from it. That is why deliberately across the world, there are reserves that are reserved. No, regardless of the ton and volumes of golds and diamonds that are found under it, nobody issue permit for anybody to mine it. And in Ghana, the language we use.
We have a long way to go. And
we have a long way to go.
Yeah, you said that in terms of the speech that the president delivered, it's a masterclass of diplomatic speeches, and that you also said that no country actually sells the actual reality. So then the question is, has the president elevated Ghana's stature on the international stage with that speech, and what will be the lasting impact of it?
So what he has done is to tell the world that regardless of what you are hearing about Ghana, this is what we have achieved. Somebody may only be consuming bad news from,
with all these protests all over the country,
all over the place. So then this is an opportunity for the first gentleman to tell the world that, hey, listen, behind that bad news, this is how far we have done one district, one factory. Perhaps there's somebody out there who is in need of a place to invest. We are still a place to be considered. Now, the point about global politics and diplomacy, yes, every country has a challenge. Every country has something going against it. But when you get this opportunity, it's not the opportunity to lament. It's not the opportunity to dwell on the negative. It's the opportunity to sell your nation. It's the opportunity to communicate in a way that gives other people belief. Of course, they may have news about how bad the economy is and all those things, but at least that you must seek to inspire confidence in your global audience. You must give them, yes, of course, we may say that, what about if the person comes here and find out that all that you are saying is wrong? This deception is part of diplomacy, is part of international politics. As the big powers who have reached the top, how do they get there? If you cannot put words together to market what is not marketable, you don't expect anybody to take you serious. That is what it is. And so, for me, where I stand is that he's done a good job. He has told the world that yes, we have challenges, but yes, as a country, we have done so well for ourselves. My presidency has so many challenges, but this is what I've been able to achieve for Ghana, and I'm ready to leave the stage and let another person come. That statement alone diffuses the tensions that the world may have concerning elections in other parts of the world. Of course, we all know that during election years, investors normally play the waiting game. They want to, particularly when it comes to the second term of a sitting president, they know the president will not be there. They want to see who next, even if it is Baumia. He has his own ideas. It was Mahama, he has his own ideas, so people will be waiting. But the certainty of knowing that the current president is exiting the scene, there's no need for any constitutional amendment here and there to try to prolong his rule, give the international community, foreign investors, and those who are interested in Ghana some level of confidence in this economy, in this our political zone that we call Ghana. So yes, as I said, it gives some international recognition, some international capital to Ghana.
Okay. Dr. Ishmael Kwabla-Hlovo, thank you so much. He's an international relations expert and a political analyst. Many thanks for your time.